Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 631. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about national parks and glaciers and trekking, Guanacos, Cape Horn, and the Straits of Magellan as we go to Patagonia in Chile. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Let's talk about Chile. I'd like to welcome to the show Talek Nantes from travelswithtalek.com. And Talek has come to talk to us about Chilean Patagonia. Talek, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
We have done a show relatively recently about Patagonia, but it was the Argentinian side of the Andes. And so when Talek pitched me Patagonia, we decided we would focus on this. Now, I know that you did this as part of a larger trip to Buenos Aires and Mendoza and Ushuaia or whatever, but we're just going to focus in on the middle bits of this, which is, 7 to 10 days worth of travel?
8 to 10, yeah.
8 to 10, excellent. Why should we talk about Chile and Patagonia first? Why should someone go there?
Because it is absolutely spectacular. The scenery is out of this world. I think that the location of the major national park, which is Torres del Paine National Park, has one of the best collections of biodiversity that you can imagine. It's got the pristine lakes, it's got the forests, thick forests, it's got the soaring mountains, the wildlife, the customs, the food. It's different from what you can find anywhere else in the world. And also it's got a lot of the navigations that you can go on ships through the Straits of Magellan and so forth.
Well, and I'm not sure that, and I'm going to say Torres del Paine is
Correct.
The prettiest national park in the world, but it's at least worth being considered in that small group of parks.
Yes.
So, and we will get to that, but where did you start your trip?
For this particular segment here, we can start with a bus ride through the Andes. And that started in Mendoza, where we took a bus. It was a 5-hour ride, and took us into the town of Santiago de Chile, the capital of Chile. But crossing the Andes by bus is something that people don't generally do. It certainly didn't occur to us until we started really thinking about it. And the scenery is spectacular crossing the mountains. You also see the tallest mountain in the whole Andeans, which is Aconcagua. And you go through these hairpin curves that are heart-stopping. But what's one of the most fascinating things is to see the different types of landscapes as you go from the bottom of the city of Mendoza all the way up to the top of the mountains and then crossing down into the other side into Santiago. It changes every hour about from a flat landscape like a meadow to tall mountains, snow-capped, absolutely gorgeous. The only thing about that is a negative is that there are lengthy customs crossings. The whole trip will take about 5.5 hours, but it takes another 5.5 hours just to go through the customs, which is cumbersome, but certainly worth it. So that's how we got into Santiago. That's how we got into Chile. And in Santiago, we took a flight down to Puerto Natales. It's about a 3.5 hour flight. Chile, as you know, is very, very long from north to south. Very skinny country, very long.
And when we say very long, it's 1,500 miles long or something like that.
That sounds about right. It's I was going to say the longest, but no, if you look at Russia, it's probably longer.
Russia would be longer. It's 2,600 miles long. I got that wrong. And Chile and Santiago, where you started, is in the northern half, just barely. Yeah.
That's correct. So you can imagine it. At 3.5 hours, it gets you all the way down to the south to the town of Puerto Natales, which is generally considered to be the gateway to the Chilean Patagonia.
Okay.
And what's interesting about this town, Puerto Natales, is that as the gateway to Patagonia, the people that go there are really going to Puerto Natales just to use it as a waypoint in order to get to the national park, the Torres del Paine National Park. And when you talk to the people in the town, hey, what's going on with your economy here? What are you seeing? They'll tell you we had a lot of difficulty getting people to stay in Puerto Natales because people would come in, just get off the plane, get on a car or a bus, and head down to Torres del Paine, which is the big draw in the area, and they would skip us entirely. So what we did was get all the town elders together and say, okay, how can we keep tourists here? We want some of the tourist cash to stay in town. And they thought about what to do. What do we have? We don't have beautiful natural resources. We don't have, great art. We don't have anything really. There's no big factories here. There's really no reason for tourists to be here, except thinking about it, they said, okay, food. Let's become a center of gastronomy of the area. And they were successful in doing so. So oddly, this little town out in the middle of nowhere, totally obscure, happens to be a central point for terrific local cuisine.
And you flew into Puerto Natales. I'm looking at a map, and you can't actually drive in from Chile. It's very cut off from the rest of the country down here in the southern part. You can drive in from Argentina, but you can't drive in from Chile. So it is, as you say, fairly economically isolated from the rest of Chile.
Yes. And so that was an issue with these guys, and they developed the cuisine there, so much so that they have what they call the gastronomic route. You know how in Europe they'll have, or in the United States, they'll have the wine route, or they'll have the beer route, or the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, that sort of thing. Well, in Puerto Natales, they created the gastronomy route. And they've developed these fantastic restaurants that you're in shock as to how good they are. And they did manage to succeed in keeping the tourists there a little bit longer. I've got a couple of names of restaurants.
Oh, please.
One that was the most popular, everybody kept recommending it, was El Bote. E-L is one word, and the next word is Bote, B-O-T-E. And there's another one called the Última Esperanza, which means the last hope.
Oh, the last hope. Oh, okay.
Right, and that's spelled Ultima, And then the last word, Esperanza, is spelled Esperanza.
Okay. And they are Chilean cuisine, which
No,
is...
they are Patagonian cuisine.
Okay, I don't know what that is.
Neither did I. Neither did I. But it's a lot of seafood, and they have their own special regional dishes. They all have different names. I don't remember what it is, but they do, in fact, bill themselves as specifically Patagonian cuisine. And there is a big focus on seafood for obvious reasons. It's easy to get. And of course, they have the barbecue, which is a staple of Chile and Argentinian cuisine.
Okay. And I assume access to good wines.
Oh, yeah, that's a given. In Chile, that's a given. I think that personally, I think that Chilean wine is one of the best values for wine anywhere. Good value for money.
That's coming from a little further north up near Santiago, but they would have to ship it in here. But okay, excellent.
So I can tell you're familiar with the area.
Well, I have been to Punta Arenas, which you're going to talk about later on, and I've been on a boat basically in this part of the world, but not in the land side.
Okay.
What's next?
A 2-hour drive will take you to Torres del Paine. You can either rent a car or you can take a bus. There are several bus companies that will take you there, and they are reliable and they're perfectly fine. So bus travel in that area is certainly doable. So a 2-hour drive will get you to Torres del Paine National Park. And the scenery there, I just can't say enough about the visuals, how spectacular they are. They're breathtaking.
And when you say the visuals, I'm picturing just incredibly jagged mountains. Of course, the pictures you always see are sunrise or sunset with the gold colors, but I assume it's relatively attractive the rest of the day also.
Yes, throughout the day. We were out hiking throughout the day, and it was beautiful. Everywhere we went, it was, even through the rain, it had its own special beauty. Very windy. The whole Patagonian area is incredibly windy. I've never seen wind like that. It's like you have to actually grab onto something because the wind will just shoo you away. I have to chase my glasses and my hats, and I learned that lesson really fast.
Well, and when you say you were hiking, it looks like it would be difficult to hike at altitude. These peaks are really just so jagged. So are you hiking relatively low down in the base of this?
There's a couple of ways to do this. That's the big draw, is the hiking in that area. There's 2 routes that are very popular. One is the W, and that is a jagged formation, as the name implies, that goes through peaks and waterfalls. It's a 4-day trek. Then there is what they call the circuit, or the O, and that's a 7 to 10-day trek. And that'll take you around the entire park, stopping at what they call the refugios, the refuge centers.
And these are huts?
These are huts, yeah. Well, it's a little bit more than huts, but basically, yes. They're wooden shacks, and they've got a guy there that takes care of people. You can actually sleep there. You have to talk to the park administration and so forth. But yeah, that's what people do. So you'll see people walking around from one side to the other with their backpack.
And do you make a reservation ahead of time for?
Yes, you have to make the reservation ahead of time with the park administration.
Okay.
And you can do that through a regular tour that you can get either online, or you get that in Puerto Natales. Puerto Natales specializes in excursions to Torres del Paine National Park. The high season, it's about $30, and low season, it's $6. I recommend that if you're going to not do the big treks and stay at the refugios, you're better off staying inside the park. They've got several hotels in that area.
Okay. You can do that and then day hike, are you saying?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Excellent.
What we did is we didn't want to commit to these 2 hikes. So from our hotel that was inside the park, we would take half-a-day treks. And we would see these beautiful waterfalls and hike. It's spectacular. Also, in the lower areas, you can look up and actually see what they call the horns of Paine,
Hmm.
which is, I'm sure you're probably envisioning this because you mentioned
I'm looking at pictures right now.
it's called the cuernos.
Okay. And these are these three jagged peaks, almost like teeth.
That's exactly right. And that's what people strive to reach
Okay.
to take the pictures there. One very interesting thing that the guidebooks do not mention and that I can't mention enough is the wildlife. There's something called a guanaco, Guanaco, which is a llama-like creature or a llama like an alpaca.
Hmm.
You get the picture. Their difference is that these animals cannot be domesticated
Hmm.
or they'll commit suicide. This is what everybody kept telling me. If you enclose them, they'll bat their head against something or starve themselves. They cannot be domesticated. Whether they commit suicide or not, they cannot be domesticated and never have been. But they are beautiful to see. And there are herds of them all over the area.
Hmm.
And to be like sitting there and watching this herd of guanacos pass by in front of you is absolutely fascinating.
Interesting.
Also, barbecue is very, very big with the locals. And if you're in the hotel, you'll probably in one of these trucks end up in a barbecue. And they'll take you to places where you'll actually have guanaco pate, which I thought I had eaten everything in the world, but I had never eaten pate made from these llama-like creatures. But it's a first time for everything. And also, there's nothing like sitting there having a traditional Chilean Patagonian barbecue with wine and with the locals and just talking to people and asking them what their lives are like there.
Hmm.
People are very friendly.
Are there any locals in particular that left an indelible memory for you?
Our tour guide was very helpful and friendly and very efficient and professional in his planning and took us to places that we had not imagined. And we thought it was going to be beautiful, but this is jaw-dropping. So he left an impression on me. Now, a historical person that left a big impression on me is someone that we learned about in Punta Arenas. When we get to that, I'll tell you a little bit about her.
Okay.
From Puerto Natales, you can take the bus to Punta Arenas, and that is a 3-hour ride. Again, buses are perfectly doable in this part of the world. And Punta Arenas is a fascinating place. As you know, you say that you visited it.
Hmm.
It was established in the mid-1800s as a penal colony originally. Interesting. I mean, all that southern, obscure, remote parts of the world is where everybody sent their criminals, like Tasmania, the Australians, or Devil's Island, the French,
Hmm.
or in Ushuaia and Patagonia for Argentinians. Today is the capital of Magallanes province, and it grew from the mid-1800s until the early 1900s phenomenally because it was the waypoint, it was the midpoint or the transfer point between the two oceans,
Hmm.
between the Pacific and the Atlantic. So all the ships that were going to one place or the other, they all had to stop there in order to refuel, to pick up passengers, whatever. So that made that town grow like crazy during that period. And there was a fascinating woman by the name of Sarah Brahm, who was a Latvian immigrant to Punta Arenas during that time period. And a lot of the immigrants there were from Croatia, from Eastern Europe. And it's interesting because you'll go to the cemetery. I love cemeteries. You'll go to the cemeteries and you'll see their names on the tombstones. There are all these Croatian names and Eastern European names, which is fascinating. So this lady was very intelligent and she made a lot of purchases in the area, land purchases, and her fortunes grew along with the town, and she became one of the richest people in Latin America during that period because of strategic investments. Now, in 1914, what happens? The Panama Canal opens, and all of a sudden, 8,000 miles has been cut off of that transit. So nobody has to go all the way around the southern Latin America. They just crossed through the Panama Canal. So the town's fortunes began to decline. But what's interesting is that you go there now and you can see this history, this fascinating history in the architecture, in the cemeteries, in the hotels, the facades. They're also Belle Epoque type, Beaux-Arts architecture. It's really fascinating to see. Anyway, she was so wealthy that she donated a large portion of her territory in order to make the cemetery of Punta Arenas. And this cemetery is said to be the second most impressive in Latin America after Recoleta in Buenos Aires. And she said that once she died, that they would have to seal the front door and only people could come in through the side door of this. She was also very eccentric. So that's exactly what happened. But here you've got this fascinating cemetery that the official name of it is the Municipal Cemetery Sarah Brahm. So I thought she was a very interesting character. And the house that she lived and many of the houses that she donated to the town are still there today, and you can go in and see them as museums.
Now, you mentioned the people from Eastern Europe. When I was there, our guide was a native German speaker.
Ah.
And there's a native German-speaking community there. There were quite a few people who came in from Germany, both Catholics and Protestants, and the Catholics pretty much assimilated because they would go to the local church, and the Protestants didn't. And so her family immigrated to Chile about the same time mine did from Germany to the U.S., so about the 1850s, but they still speak German at home. My family gave that up quite a while ago, at least. My mom didn't. Well, I guess my mom may have spoken German at home, but English is her first language.
So that's 4 generations.
At least there's a German-speaking school there still, and so there's still that strong community there, which I thought was very interesting.
I'm sure that some of the names that I saw in the cemetery were German, and since I might not have been able to tell the difference between Croatian and German, but I'm sure some of them have to be, because where else would they have been buried? That was the municipal cemetery where everybody was buried. But you saw very few Hispanic names. That's what I found utterly fascinating.
Ah, bon chien. Bonjour, je suis Theo, a tour leader with Explore. And this is Punti. He's helping us find truffles under the trees next to this beautiful vineyard. Maybe for tomorrow's cooking class? We call it semi-heure. Parfait. Semi-o'clock. Not everyone gets to enjoy a Bordeaux sunset this way, but you will if you explore. No, Punti. Search exploreworldwide.com and don't just travel. Explore.
Any things you want to mention in terms of things to do around Punta Arenas?
Well, Punta Arenas is the kickoff point for the ship sailing through the Straits of Magellan. So we were really only there for half a day. We got there early, went to the municipal cemetery because everybody says you absolutely have to do that. And they were right. And walked around the city, had a meal. And at 6 p.m., we took the ship. We boarded the ship to sail for a 4-day navigation of the Straits of Magellan, the Beagle Channel. And we tried to circumnavigate the Cape Horn, but the captain said that the waters were just a little bit too iffy for us to attempt that. So they decided not to. And then we just continued sailing on to Ushuaia. But I can tell you a little bit about the Ventus Australis ship that we took. It was fantastic to be on this ship. Number one, food was very good. One of the most interesting things that we saw is what they call Glacier Alley. The ship sails through this strait, and on either side are these huge glaciers that they're like mountains that come up on either side of you, and they each have their name. There's about 6 or 7 of them. But as you're sailing through this, it's a surreal feeling. It was very different. One of the places that we did stop at was Pia Glacier. And there we were actually able to walk on the fringes of the glacier on land, because if you're close to the water, as you know, that the icebergs can come up and really wreak havoc on anything near it. But we were able to walk on the fringes of the glacier, and it's huge. It's if you really want to see how insignificant you are, stand next to a glacier and look up. And we were able to grab some ice from the glacier. It was just lying there, and there's a little restaurant there where you can pour the ice into your drink and have some whiskey
Oh, funny.
with ice from a real life glacier.
Well, and you mentioned the number of glaciers. As I recall, they're pretty close together, too, because I want to say we saw 6 glaciers in about an hour as we cruised through there.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
And at least one shipwreck.
Wow. No, I missed that one.
I've got pictures of a shipwreck. I don't know if it was an intentional one or unintentional, but you always pay attention when you're on a boat and you see a shipwreck. And I have one correction
imagine.
I need to make. I screwed up here a little bit. I was talking about the German-speaking community in Punta Arenas, and there is one. There is a German school there, but the German-speaking guide that I actually ran into was in Portimont, which is further north,
Oh, yeah.
well up, about a third of the way up from here. So I was conflating the two, I'm afraid.
I'm sure that there's a bunch of Germans down there.
As I say, I was not wrong about there being a German school in Punta Arenas, but that isn't where I ran into somebody who spoke German.
Okay. Other things to see on the ship is the wildlife. Took us out on Zodiacs, inflatable rafts, to see the Magellan penguins. And you don't get off the boat, you don't get off the raft. You just stay in there, and you're able to get close enough to see them wandering around. And that's very interesting to see, Magellan penguins. Also, from the ship to land, when you're on the Zodiac, there are dolphins that accompany you on either side of the raft, which is fascinating. Could you imagine that? Just zooming down in the Zodiac, and there's this dolphin, which is just a few feet away from you, jumping in and out of the water, accompanying you, and then we're friendly. They also have a lot of beavers, which are actually a nuisance and have caused all sorts of problems, and they're trying to get rid of the beavers. So you actually see them. You see condors, and you see something called a rhea. I'm not sure if that's even an English word, but it is a type of ostrich.
Okay.
And then there's this big fat bird that they call a caracara. I'm sure that's not the scientific name.
That sounds like that might be the call it makes even. You started to talk about the boat. How large a boat was this that you were taking?
I don't know in size, but it's about 200 passengers.
Okay. So pretty small compared to modern cruise ships. More like expedition class, yeah.
Correct. It doesn't even approach a cruise ship.
Yeah, you might have had a fun ride down there at the southern point there at Cape Horn. So one thing we should say, and we've talked about this a little bit on the episode we did about cruising on a cruise ship around Cape Horn, but Cape Horn is not actually on the continent. It's on an island off the southern edge of the continent. And you can tell when you are not in the protected waters of the Straits of Magellan or you mentioned the glacier things there, very smooth waters there.
Or the Beagle Channel.
Or the Beagle Channel, exactly. But when you get out there in that open ocean, even on a relatively calm day, it's got some motion.
Yes.
I've got some video I shot of the boat that we were on, and there, wasn't like there were great big swells or waves or whatever, but the boat was doing quite a bit of up and down kind of motion, quite noticeable. And so in a smaller boat, it might have been a good ride, let's just say.
Yeah. Were you frightened? I mean, did you feel stress?
I didn't feel stress. I think some people did feel seasick.
Mm-hmm.
You're prone to seasickness and you're down in the Southern Ocean there, especially as you head down from there down to Antarctica. It is notoriously rough water sometimes, just depending on how lucky you get when you cross over there. But really, from the moment that you get out into the ocean down there, if you're prone to seasickness, you're going to want to have something.
Yeah.
Dramamine or the patch or whatever works for you.
I felt a little fear. I felt a little discomfort. Yeah. I'm certainly not going to lie. I mean, I'm from New York City, so like ships are not something that I'm all that familiar with, and that was a new experience for me, and it was a little scary. The waters were certainly roiling, and the captain said, no, that we were on our way there. We were going to circumnavigate it. That was the whole thing. And we just didn't. The guy said, just no way, let's just go back. And everybody was fine with that.
Yeah.
But it certainly was a little bit stressful. One thing that I did think about is I had just read a book called Over the Edge of the World, which is the story of Magellan coming from Spain in the early 1500s, going all the way to, circumnavigating the globe. It was his ship. He actually died in the
Philippines. Yeah, it's not him per se, but yes.
Yeah, but the ship did it. Actually, out of like 217 people that left Spain, 3 years later, only 18 returned.
Right, only one of the 5 ships, yeah.
When only one of the 5 ships, yeah. Do you remember the name?
I do not.
Neither do I.
Okay. We'll leave that as an exercise for the listener there.
I think it was the Trinity. Trinidad, okay. I think. I'm almost positive, but don't quote me on that. But I think it's a Trinidad. And they had these silly little wooden boats. Oh, yeah. Can you imagine it? Here we are with all the modern conveniences of the day, and we're still experiencing these roiling waters. Can you imagine these guys on their dinky little ships?
Yeah, without weather radar also. So these things would come up on them. It's interesting as you look at this region, you were talking about, for instance, you stayed in the Zodiac. I'm sure there were rules about whether you could go into the rookery there with the penguins. But if you look at a map of Chile, and I'm looking at Google Maps, for instance, which colors national parkland as green, pretty much from Portimont down is almost all national parklands, or at least the majority of the land in that southern portion of Chile is dedicated to national parks. And so we talked about Torres del Paine, but you actually, as you were going and stopping at the Penguins, you were probably down in one of the other national parks down there as well.
Oh, yes. That was no longer Torres del Paine.
Yeah. Interesting. Other things that we want to know if we're going to go in your footsteps and do this trip?
You were better off going there during summer months. Their summer months are winter months. So,
what month were you there?
I was there in January.
Okay.
So that's summer for them. So you would want to go December, January, February. Those are the best. March, thereabouts. So go there. The wine is great. These are meat lovers.
Right.
So if you're a vegetarian, it's not going to be that easy for you. It's still doable, but it's probably not going to be that easy for you. Mm-hmm. Beer is good. The wine is good. I like them both. And people are very friendly and warm.
Anything that surprised you?
My biggest surprise was the wildlife, was the guanacos. Okay. I had never seen those before. And the guy kept describing them to me. And I was like, okay, so it's like a llama, big deal. We've all seen llamas, petted llamas in zoos. And although these look like llamas, they're pretty different. And the fact that they couldn't be domesticated, to be so close to a herd of unfamiliar animals in their natural environment was utterly fascinating to me. I just have video of me going, look at that, look, here he comes. Oh, look at this. Like for a long time.
I was on safari in Africa, and you just described exactly the noise we were making. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Anything else that we should know before we get into some of our wrap-up questions?
If you can make that crossing by the Andes by bus, it's worth it. It's one of those dramatic things that you're going to remember for a very long time. It's the equivalent of seeing the Great Wall of China for the first time, or Piazza San Marco for the first time. It's a biggie. It's up there. And navigating the Straits of Magellan, if you like nature and hiking a glacier, if you can take a short trip to Ventus Australis, it's fascinating.
Well, and how far in advance did you book that excursion?
About 4 months.
Okay. I didn't know whether this is something that you can book when you get down there, or whether you ought to do it in advance, or what?
No, I would do it in advance just to be on the safe side.
Excellent. You're standing in the prettiest spot in Chilean Patagonia. Where are you standing, and what are you looking at?
Okay, I am standing on a small hill that overlooks a large lake that has an island in the middle of it. And there is a restaurant on that island, and there is a bridge that goes from the island to the landmass which I'm standing on. The water is very blue, and behind it are beautiful tall mountains that are snow-capped. That's what I'm seeing.
Where are we?
We're at Torres del Paine National Park.
Okay, I assumed that, but I didn't want to assume that. Is this on a particular hike? If people wanted to go to exactly where you were, where should they go?
I don't know the name, but I think that
Not the O and not the W.
no, it's not the O or the W. This is for the less ambitious hikers.
Yep.
So it's something that people are taken to on a regular basis. So if you go there and all you have to do is describe the place and people will know immediately where it is. It's a standard hike from all of the hotels that are in the park.
Excellent. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Patagonia.
Guanacos, suicidal guanacos.
Suicidal guanacos. That's pretty serious there. I'm not sure that I want to be domesticated either, so I understand where they're coming from.
Yeah.
Excellent. And if you had to summarize Patagonia in just 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Breathtaking.
Are we doing that as a hyphenated word?
It's one word.
Okay.
Hyphenated, yes. It's one word. Breathtaking. Culturally fascinating. That's pushing it. That's not really 2 words. That can't be hyphenated. That is cultural, historical.
And in terms of the culture and the history, tell me a little bit more about that. Where did you access some of the history down there?
Reading before I got there.
Mm-hmm.
I majored in history. I'm a history buff. And I was fascinated by the cemetery itself. And once I went to the cemetery, I had read a lot about it before. And this is in Punta Arenas. And once I went there and I saw the gravestones and the names, I was beginning to wonder, why are these Croatians? What are they doing there?
Uh-huh.
How did they get here? How did this happen? And I learned more about it, which led me to this woman, Sarah Brown.
Got it. Mm-hmm.
Who the cemetery is named after. And I was fascinated. I mean, when do you see it in the late 1800s, an immigrant, 15-year-old immigrant, lands in Punta Arenas and becomes one of the richest women
Mm-hmm.
in Latin America as a result of shrewd land investments. I mean, that in itself is pretty unusual.
Mm-hmm.
So I was fascinated by that. And then you see the architecture, and you know that this city, this town, was rich at one point.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like other towns that you'll see the basic buildings and very utilitarian. These were structures that were modeled after these European palaces out in the middle of nowhere, and that you inevitably are going to be curious about the history of the town.
Excellent.
So that I found pretty interesting. The nature, if you're a nature buff, to be able to go through the Straits of Magellan on that ship was a gift.
Excellent.
And if you're going to do that, you should read that book first. I recommend that to anybody, so you can compare how you're feeling and then imagine how the Spaniards must have felt, or the Portuguese on their little ship in the early 1500s.
Put a link to that book in the show notes, because I've forgotten the name of it already by this point. So, Over the Edge of the World. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes. Excellent. Our guest again has been Talek Nantes from travelswithtalek.com. And Talek, if we were looking for your best post about this trip on your blog, what post would you steer us to?
Patagonia in a 21-day photo tour.
Excellent. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well, so you can check that out. And then also check out some of the lovely pictures of this very beautiful region. And Talek, thanks for coming on the show and sharing with us your love for Patagonia.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
In news of the community, remember that trip that we're planning in 2019, in May of 2019 specifically, to South Africa and Botswana and Victoria Falls. Love to have you on there. You can sign up at amateurtraveler.com/Africa 2019. Doesn't your life need a safari? We heard from Savio about the episode we did recently on Singapore, and Savio said, "Hi, Chris, another fine episode on Amateur Traveler. I happened to visit Singapore a couple times in the past 5 years, but I did learn a few more things listening to this podcast. For anyone interested in World War II history, there are a number of sites in Singapore that are definitely worth a visit. The Kranji War Memorial is maintained by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. It is the final resting place for the soldiers who died during World War II defending Singapore. A lesser-known site is the old Ford Motor Factory Museum. The factory was built by Ford in October 1941, but before it had a chance to produce any cars, Singapore fell to the invading Japanese army. On February 15, 1942, General Lieutenant Percival from the British formally surrendered to the Japanese on this site. Near the end of the podcast, your guest, Ashley, mentioned the swanky Fullerton Hotel. During the Japanese occupation in World War II, the building became the headquarters of the Japanese military administration in Singapore. By the way, Fullerton offered several free walking tours about its properties. You don't need to be a guest to participate. I did 2 of them, and they were excellent. Thanks so much, Savio, and keep those in mind if you head to Singapore. With that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com. If you want to sponsor the show, you can use the same email address, or you can leave a comment on this show at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral.